Circle K is one of the largest chains of convenience stores in the world, and that has been the case for many years now. There are about 7,000 of them in the United States and an additional 7,000 that are split between more than 20 other countries around the world. I think it's safe to say that most of the people watching this have been there before, or at the very least have one conveniently located nearby. I always think of the Polar Pop branded fountain drinks that you could buy there. They also sell coffee, baked goods, hot food, gasoline, of course, and all the great stuff that you would expect to find at a convenience store. The only comparable chain that is larger would be 7-Eleven, though I do want to point out that 7-Eleven is much more heavily franchised, whereas most of the Circle K stores are owned by the company, and that structure results in billions of dollars in revenue for them each year. Today, by most measures, Circle K is considered a major success, but it has been a bumpy road to get there, exemplified by the fact that in 1990, after over 40 years of operation, they filed for bankruptcy. There is a lot to talk about here. So for today, I want to focus on the eventful rise, fall, and rise again of Circle K. Fred Hervey had been operating businesses practically his entire life. When he was a kid, he sold magazine subscriptions and eventually opened his own concession stand at his father's outdoor movie theater. When he was 21 years old, during the Great Depression, he started a more professional root beer stand with his brother, went on to serve in the Navy in World War II, and then serve as the mayor of El Paso. In 1951, he bought a small chain of 3 stores in El Paso called K's Food Stores. The man who started it had the last name of K, so that's where the K comes from in the name. See, 6 years later, when he was trying to expand it into the Phoenix area, he learned that there was already a chain there with a very similar name called K's Food Products, so to avoid confusion, he changed the name of his company to Circle K Food Stores and introduced the fitting logo to go along with it. In fact, I cannot think of any other company where the name of it actually describes the logo. That's unusual. In the 1960s, they moved their headquarters to Phoenix and they had a public stock offering to raise money to open many more stores. In the 1970s, they surpassed 1,000 of them, and in the 1980s, a prominent Phoenix-based businessman named Carl Eller was put in charge as their new CEO and chairman of the board, and that is when everything started getting crazy over at Circle K.
Strange things are afoot at the Circle K.
Carl Eller had previously worked for an advertising company in the area selling billboard space. He was eventually given the opportunity to buy that company for $5 million, so he scrambled to find investors to raise the money, and he made it happen. Throughout the 1960s, that company grew and merged with another company, making him millions of dollars in the process. Notably, Carl Eller was a founding investor in the Phoenix Suns basketball team with the goal of bringing professional sports teams to that city, and was a big help in a merger between Columbia Pictures and the Coca-Cola Company in the early 1980s. Clearly, he had a proven history in making savvy business deals, and he was kind of known for that. So in 1983, when he was put in charge of Circle K, his strategy was to scale the business by making deals to acquire the competition. And I know many other companies have grown by doing the same thing. I've talked about them on this very channel multiple times, but I have to say, his approach was abnormally aggressive. Almost right after he took over, they spent $225 million to buy almost 1,000 locations of a competing chain called Utotem. That was such a large acquisition, considering Circle K only had 1,200 locations going into it. Since they rebranded all of the new stores as Circle K's, the deal effectively doubled their size. And that was just the beginning. The following year, they paid another $100 million to buy 435 locations branded as Little General stores. The year after that, it was 450 Shop and Go stores. In 1988, it was over 500 stores from the Charter Company, and that same year, they even spent an additional $150 million to buy almost 500 stores from 7-Eleven. Carl Eller and his aggressive acquisition spree put them over $1 billion in sales for the first time and made them the second largest chain of their kind. When he took over, they had 1,200 stores, and by the end of the decade, they had 4,600, almost quadrupling in size within a 7-year span. So when we're talking about the initial rise of Circle K, this is what happened, and he was planning planning to take things even further. Despite growing 4 times larger, he still fell short of his goal of reaching 5,000 stores by the end of that decade. And that is because before he had the opportunity, everything started going bad. Profits started nosediving, they weren't making enough money to keep up with their debt payments. Carl Eller resigned from his position, and 1 week later, they filed for bankruptcy. Now, especially if you follow this channel, you're probably thinking that there were complications from expanding too quickly, and you are completely right. Obviously, that was a huge part of it, but there is a bigger picture here that I want to try to paint by listing what I believe to be the 3 biggest reasons behind their fall. Starting off, they were at the center of a couple of scandals around that time that were hurting their public image. There was a lawsuit involving gas prices, but probably the most notable one would be their controversial health insurance plan. It was a policy issued to their thousands of employees that did not cover issues resulting from lifestyle illnesses. So if someone developed a disease from drinking or doing drugs, their plan would not cover the treatment for it, which I guess is almost unheard of. That policy would also deny coverage to anyone suffering from AIDS unless it was contracted through a blood transfusion, which is where the real backlash came from. They were accused of being discriminatory, protested by gay rights groups. The policy was changed, but overall it still upset a lot of people and hurt the reputation of Circle K. Also on my list, the competition between convenience stores had never been stronger. When the company started in the 1950s, there were well under 1,000 convenience stores throughout the entire country, and by the 1990s, that number was approaching 100,000, many of which were now owned by oil companies. They were all opening up their own. I mean, how often do you see a convenience store attached to a gas station? And when that combo is owned by an oil company, they're generally able to sell their gas at lower prices. That was actually part of the reasoning behind the big expansion strategy. Seek out some of the smaller brands that were struggling to compete, buy them at a reasonable price, and then use economies of scale to take on these oil companies. Circle K had already been selling gas since 1964. That's actually why they dropped the food stores part from their name, so they wouldn't be associated with selling just food. And by 1990, most of their stores had a gas station attached to them, but it was still hard to compete. Just before the bankruptcy, they were hoping to avoid it by potentially being bought by an oil company, and later in that decade after the bankruptcy, Circle K did in fact get acquired by a large oil company. So there were most definitely changing dynamics in the market around that time. My final reason behind their fall, of course, would be the acquisitions. It turns out that was a very risky strategy. For one, it was simply too much too fast, and the company was having trouble keeping track of everything, what was being sold, in which stores, and for how much. It was not an efficient operation, and that was hurting their profits. Then, they tried to improve their profits by raising the price of many of their items, and I'm sure we can all see how that can backfire. The customers started going to the cheaper competitors, but to their credit, they did bring those prices back down pretty quick, but it was still harmful. And consider that almost every year there was a new acquisition for hundreds of millions of dollars. Circle K didn't have that kind of money lying around, so a lot of it was funded through debt. And I'm not just talking about bank loans. Most of that money was coming from junk bonds. They were selling these risky, high-yield bonds to people that, to my knowledge, became completely worthless following that bankruptcy. Seriously, this was not a stable company. When Carl Eller took over, they had $40 million in debt, and by the time he left 7 years later, it was $1.1 billion. When you have over $1 billion in debt, which I hope nobody watching this does, but if you did, you would be paying a lot of interest, over $100 million a year in their case, which only lowered their profits even further. So at that point, Circle K was a large company with $3.5 billion in sales that was losing money. They reported over $700 million in losses in 1990, and that is why they were forced to file for bankruptcy. That right there could have easily been the end of the story, but as we know, Circle K has made a tremendous comeback. So now, for the happier part of the video, I'm gonna switch it up by identifying what I believe to be the 3 biggest reasons behind their comeback. The first of which being their improved efficiency. In the early 1990s, if you had a Circle K in your neighborhood, there was about a 50-50 chance that it either closed or was sold around that time. They trimmed down to a much leaner 2,500 stores to cut down their costs, and they used the money that they made from those sales to renovate and update the ones that remained open. There were not nearly as many, but they were better. My next reason is the larger companies that took control of them. They not only kept Circle K alive, but they propelled it forward in a big way. Specifically, in 1996, as I hinted at before, Circle K was bought by a large oil company called Tosco. They were looking to sell their gasoline at a retail level to take advantage of higher margins, so paying $700 million for Circle K and their over 2,000 already established gas stations was a great way to do that. Then in the following years, Tosco just kept getting bigger when they were bought by Phillips, and then Phillips merged with Conoco, all massive oil companies by the way. In 2003, Circle K was sold to a Canadian operator of convenience stores called Alimentation Couche-Tard for over $800 million. They were looking to expand into the US market, first by acquiring the chain Bigfoot in 2001, that is actually where the Polar Pop brand came from, I think that's interesting, and buying Circle K was a way to do it on a much bigger scale. My final reason behind the comeback is the rebranding. See, Couche-Tard went on to acquire additional large convenience store chains. Notably, in 2010, they tried to buy Casey's General Stores for $2 billion, but were unsuccessful, but 2 years later, they did buy a Norwegian chain for $2.8 billion, and 2 years after that, they bought an American company known for their Kangaroo Express stores in a deal totaling $1.7 billion. I know, there are so many acquisitions in this video, but that's how the industry consolidated, and that is how Circle K came out among the top of it all. You see, by 2015, they had all these separately branded chains of convenience stores and figured that it would be smart to unify them under one global brand name. They revealed a new logo for Circle K and announced that everything they owned, except the original Couche-Tard chain itself, would be rebranded under that logo. So that is how we have 14,000 stores around the world branded under the name Circle K. It is such an unconventional path. After a dramatic rise and fall, Circle K has somehow managed to rebuild to triple the size they were before that fall. Let me know in the comments, have you ever been to Circle K? And if you have, how do they compare to 7-Eleven or the other convenience stores? In your opinion, do they belong in that number 2 spot, or would you like to see them go higher or lower? I think this is such a cool story. It has all the usual elements you would expect to see in these videos, but to such an extreme level, and somehow combined in an unexpected way. Let me know if you agree with that, and any other thoughts you have about Circle K or their incredible story, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Only at Circle K. What else do you need?
Thank you for watching.